Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today in the co-captain's chair, once again, all the way from the UK, Mr. Andy Edwards, drummer extraordinaire from Rain and X of Frost and IQ and Robert Plant's solo band. What's happening, Andy? How are you today?
I'm good, Pete. Are you okay?
Doing good. Doing good.
That's good.
Hanging in there, keeping busy, the normal thing we do over here in New York and the USA. We just keep rolling and rolling and tumbling. And today we're going to talk about the Tony Williams Lifetime. So obviously one of the greatest drummers of all time, Mr. Williams, from his days in Miles Davis through some solo stuff. And of course his fusion band Lifetime, just an incredible musician and one of the all-time greats. And I am a firm believer that if he would have kind of kept a solid, stable lineup for Lifetime, they would probably be mentioned as one of the upper echelon fusion bands alongside Return to Forever, Weather Report, and Mahavishnu. As it stands, they're still up there in the discussion, but I think, almost every album, different lineup, different style, I think kind of maybe stunted their being recognized for the greatness that they were capable of. And, not a huge catalog. We're looking at, what we've decided to do today is we've got 6 Tony Williams Lifetime albums and then a Tony Williams solo album, which is basically kind of a Lifetime album. So we included that there. So we've got 7 albums in total. There's some varying degrees of quality here. The stuff that's amazing is off the charts good. The stuff that isn't is a little bizarre, but has its moments. At least that's my opinion on it. So I'll have Andy kick us off with his number 7.
Well, before I kick off, just, being a drummer, I think it's worth mentioning that Tony Williams, for me, is in a separate category of drummers. And that's because in the 1960s, he really pioneered a way of playing, which was a lot less rudimental. A lot of drummers played like drum rudiments. So you listen to Buddy Rich and you hear sort of snare drum rolls and rolls around the kit. Tony Williams played a lot more top down, so he opened the kit up, a lot of things between his hands and feet, a lot of linear playing, and he also used a lot of metric modulation, time changes. So he really, I think it's worth bearing in mind before we carry on that this is one of the greatest drummers. I'd call him the father of modern drumming, and influenced everybody across the board, not just fusion and jazz drummers, but also millions of rock drummers. So approaching this catalog, bearing that in mind, it is a little bit patchy. And right at the bottom, I've got the 3rd Tony Williams Lifetime album, Ego, which, that's the one. I love the cover. And that's about it. I find this album difficult. And I put it on again, and I'm almost like going, am I really missing something here? Because it just sounds, for a start, the recording quality is pretty awful.
Yeah,
you agree? Awful. Yeah. And you've got they seem to jump into a riff. The riff doesn't go anywhere. They meander around soloing for a bit, and then Tony does a little bit singing, maybe. Then there's a percussion jam, and you go, that's a nice little percussion jam, but they'll do it again and again. I get the feeling he's trying to do something. He's trying to pioneer something, and he's pushing the envelope, and I commend him for that. I think he is one of the original fusion musicians, and I think he's trying to push the envelope. I think the problem with Tony Williams in the 70s is he wasn't a composer. When you listen to the 80s albums like Foreign Intrigue, he's suddenly become a really, really great composer. But I feel sometimes it's just lacking some tunes. There Comes the Time I do really like. But if you listen to the Gil Evans album from 1975 called There Comes the Time, where Gil was able to arrange Tony's tune, it suddenly becomes incredible. So I'd rather have the Gil Evans version, or even the version on Play or Die, which he did in 1980. So that my favorite track has still got 2 better versions elsewhere. I really have a difficulty with this album, to be honest.
Yeah, my 2 at the bottom are not that enjoyable, and I'll get to Ego in a minute. But I'm going to go with the old Bums Rush from '72, which came, it was the last album I think for their contract with Polydor. before, you know, the band kind of reconfigured and did some really, really good things. The Old Bums Rush has got this big lineup. It's very keyboard dominated. It's kind of funky. It's got some R&B. You know, Herb Bushler is playing bass on this album. It's actually his bass work is awesome here. You Make It Easy is pretty memorable. Changing Man it's kind of bizarre. I think his father plays sax on that, and it's got vocals. It's kind of noisy, but kind of like free jazzish. The Boudang's got a lot of groove, but it's just kind of messy. And overall, I feel this whole album to me is messy and it's noisy and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And every track sounds like completely different and it doesn't sound like a band effort. And I think that's the album I have with this one. And that's the problem I have with Ego as well, which I'll talk about in a minute because that's my next one. But yeah, I don't find these two albums very enjoyable at all. Which is weird because a lot of the other albums are all really good for the most part. So it's just weird. This catalog is like a tale of like 3 or 4 different stories. And that's kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning. It's like if he would have kind of kept a similar, lineup and kind of focus, this is one of the greatest bands of all time. And as it is, it's like you talk about the Tony Williams Lifetime. It's like, well, which lineup? Which era, right? And it's like we're not talking a lot of years here, so it's like it's just there's just so much disjointedness in this catalog, which I think is a damn shame because when they got it right, they really got it right. This album is not, in my opinion. So back to you for number 6.
Yeah, you probably guessed it. Old Bums Rush is at number 6. The only reason it beats Ego, because at least it's got some nice funky bits on it every now and then. There's some cool grooves if you can listen to The Mud, and with these first 2 albums, maybe if they'd been better recorded, maybe they were let down because of course, the early Lifetime albums are a little bit let down by the recording as well, so, probably his deal wasn't that great. They didn't have that much money. I can remember chatting to a guitar tech, a drum tech once, who I won't say who he tech for, but for a very famous drummer. And I said, did you ever tech for Tony Williams? And he went, he could never have afforded me. So, I think Tony in the 70s wasn't in the same bracket as John McLaughlin, Stanley Clarke, John McPonte. He wasn't in that bracket. So I think maybe the deals weren't that great. So I'm trying to give excuses for this, but yeah, Old Bums Rush, just, I listened to them again for this, and it was a real chore just to listen to them all the way through. It's like, when's this going to end? So yeah. What more can you say?
I know. Well, my number 6 is Ego. You basically said it. It's like, another brand new lineup. I mean, you look on paper, it should work, right? You got the great Ron Carter on bass. You got Larry Young is still kind of, the holdover from the first lineup. You got a lot of percussion going on this album. You got Don Elias and Warren Smith, right? Do you really need both of them? I don't know. There's like a looser, kind of jazzier feel to this album. But again, we talked about it on the Stanley Clarke episode. Tony should not be singing. And I think every time he started doing those weird little vocalizations of his that he would, he did it on the first on Emergency, and then he does it on this album. I'm just kind of like, please stop, just play. Two Worlds kind of has a good swing to it. Mom and Dad's got some really cool haunting organ.
They're better tunes without a doubt.
Yeah, those are better. I just find this a really strange, unfocused. It's kind of avant-garde in spots, but it just doesn't really work. And to me, it sounds like this is like, and maybe you can appreciate this. This to me sounds like this is the album that he did for all the drummers out there, because there's a lot of little drum solos, a lot of percussion things going on. For someone like me who's not a drummer, I guess I can appreciate it, but I don't enjoy it. And I don't like it. Yeah, right. So even not for you guys, right? Yeah. So I don't know.
It's just a bizarre thing. If you go onto YouTube, you can find some videos of this group, right? And that's way better.
I'm sure.
Even that's better. Ted Dunbar is a great guitarist, So I think you're probably right. On paper, it all seemed to work, and then it just messed up in the studio.
Yeah.
So maybe they expected more from it. I don't know, but yeah, I find these 2 albums really troublesome. And what you are right, that So when you mentioned Tony Williams' Lifetime, it's not like Weather Report or Return to Forever, because this is so different and also so bad. So it's like totally negates the other stuff in a way, you know.
True, yeah. I mean, I think they try, like on Circa 45 on here, I think they try to recapture some of that early stuff,
Yeah.
and that's pretty decent. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't really work for me. It's not very enjoyable. I remember when I first bought that, I was like, oh, great, because I was like getting into Tony Williams and the Lifetime band. I was like, and I put this on, I'm like, whoa, wait a second, that doesn't sound like everything else, not even close. So yeah, whatever.
So
back to you.
Number 5, I have got $1 Million Legs at number 5. It's a really good album, really great album. But for me, the drop between Believe It and this is a big drop.
Yeah,
you know, and again, it's because they've added all this stuff onto it, you know, the strings and all these other bits they've added on. Also, I feel it just doesn't have the compositions either. It falls a little bit into the same trap as Ego, where they've got a riff. It sounds like a party going on in the studio sometimes, which we weren't invited to, so we don't quite get it. You know, I bet it felt great at the time. You know, really interested to hear Holdsworth in this context. You know, sort of, trying to find his way on this album. But it's a great album. I do like it. I'm just comparing it to Believe It, and it falls short for me.
Yeah, that's also my next pick, and I've got both Believe It and $1 Million Legs on this, both albums on this one collection, which is fantastic. I mean, the problem here, you have the same lineup, which is a great lineup. You know, Tony Newton and Alan Pasqua and Holdsworth and Tony. I mean, on paper, this is one of the most lethal bands ever. And I think on that first album together, they showed that. And in this album, I think the compositions aren't here. I think that's the problem.
Exactly.
There, all of a sudden you got some horns and things, and it's trying to be a little funky. And it almost, like, to me, I can just imagine if you were to be like a fly on the wall back during these sessions, Holdsworth probably saying, yeah, this is kind of boring, right? Because I think, he almost sounds out of place when he appears. He's amazing as always, but I just don't think that this album, that there's this synergy on Believe It that is not on this album. And again, I think maybe it was never going to reach those lofty levels, but I just, there's some good stuff on here. I mean, Sweet Revenge is really good. You Did It to Me, Baby is kind of funky. And again, it's got those vocals. I'm like, whatever. Joyfield Summer is kind of Weather Report-ish, I think, with a nice solo from Alan. What You Do to Me is kind of atmospheric, a little bit different from what we normally hear from this band, but man, it's got a killer Holdsworth solo on it and some really nice electric piano from Pasqua. I mean, he's a great player. And
that's why I say it is a great album. There's some really great moments on there. It's not a classic album. It's a great album with some really great playing on there.
Yeah, it is. And it's a shame, because you know what? If we only ever had this album, we'd probably be thinking of it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
As it is, with no Believe It ever, it's damn good. You throw Believe It into the equation, all of a sudden you realize that it doesn't quite cut the mustard when compared to that one. But a damn good album, a damn fine album. So there's really not much you can say.
It's like,
right? It's just,
I just feel like, because I listened to it again and I thought the best track on here is still nowhere near any of the tracks on Believe It. It's that big a difference. It's not
absolutely, that hits it right on the head. Yep, absolutely. It's fine for what it is, right? But just you got it. Yeah.
So at number 4, I have Joy of Flying, which I think is important to include in this. I know it's not a Tony Williams Lifetime album, but he actually only did one solo album in the 70s, and this is the one. And I think it's a really, really fantastic album. Really do. I think it's got a really incredible lineup of musicians on there. And it's really interesting to hear like someone like George Benson, because I'm going on my memory now, but Michael Brecker, Paul Jackson, Jan Hammer, George Benson, and Ralph McDonald on one track.
I mean, come on, right? Yep. You got Scott on here, and everybody's on here.
Yeah. Hip Skip is absolutely fantastic. And with a lot of fusion albums, when you see the lineup like that, and then the track comes on and no one actually really plays, but they all really play on that. As I said in the Stanley Clarke, video, if Jan Hammer's on an album, I love it, and I think it's some of Jan Hammer's great playing. It almost feels like some of the stuff he did on There and Back by Jeff Beck. It's it really comes in, and also Jan and Tony together is just such a brilliant mix. There's some really heavy funk, because Tony, sometimes he tries to be funky. I don't really class him as a funk drummer, but on some of the Herbie Hancock stuff, he's really funky, and on this, he's really, really funky. There's some really incredible funk playing. The only problem I have with this album is the Cecil Taylor improvisation at the end. Now, I do like free jazz and avant-garde jazz. I grew up listening to that as well, and I like Cecil Taylor. I've got some Cecil Taylor albums here, but it does seem a little bit like they just went, "Oh, this would be a good idea," And for me, it's a bit boring, the Cecil Taylor, Tony Williams bit, and also completely out of place. The people who are into this album for the funk and all the George Benson bits must have been thinking, what the hell's going on when they got to that last track. When you read the the sort of snobby jazz reviews, which will always never get fusion, this album's great because of the Cecil Taylor, Tony Williams.
Right. Forget about everything else, right?
Forget about everything else. There's some funk stuff on there, but there's a wonderful, Tony Williams in the 90s, just before he died, he did a couple of albums for Bill Laswell. One was called Akana, which featured Buckethead on guitar, and there was another one he did with Derek Bailey, which was like an incredible free guitarist. They are amazing, because Tony Williams does have that avant-garde thing in his playing, and this is one of the things all the way through this. I keep wondering, am I just not getting this? But I just don't think it fits on the album, that track. But the rest of it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and it's also my number 4. You got Open Fire on here too, which I think he was trying to. He's got Ronnie Montrose and Brian Wagner on it. I mean, he was planning on doing something. He was putting together a band there with Ronnie Montrose, which never transpired. But this is a pretty happening album. And again, not a Lifetime album, but kind of came at the tail end of the Lifetime band, and it feels like a Lifetime album, right? For the most part. And you just have to wonder if he would have taken some of the musicians that played on this album and actually put together a band, what that could have been. So I think it's
and I think especially the stuff where it's just him and Jan Hammer, that could have been where the Lifetime went. Because if you think of the stuff Jan Hammer did with John Abercrombie, Timeless, that is where Lifetime should have gone. That stuff, and they. And I think that's quite interesting to hear, just the sort of keyboard and drums thing going on. But yeah, it's I've forgotten about the Montrose bit, because Ronnie Montrose at that time, he was trying to move towards fusion, wasn't he? So you can obviously see him with Tony Williams was a fantastic idea. So great album, way better than Ego and
You I would say anybody watching, if you haven't taken a dive into Tony Williams and Lifetime specifically, you can safely forget about those albums for now, and everything mentioned going forward are the ones you should concentrate on. So, all right, back to you.
Number 3 is Turn It Over by Tony Williams Lifetime. I think this is an incredible album. The consensus is it's not quite as good as Emergency. I think it's absolutely brilliant. The only reason it's down here because it hasn't. Emergency is the album that changes jazz fusion. I pulled out if I can find it, because in the when I got into Tony Williams Lifetime, you just when I was growing up, you couldn't get hold of the albums, and so I had this. That was my Lifetime album. It's called Once in a Lifetime. It's on Verve Records, and it's basically Turn It Over and Emergency all together with a couple of tracks missing of each one. So when I was listening to Tony Williams Lifetime, I couldn't tell which ones were on Emergency.
Yeah, exactly.
Or which ones on Turn It Over, and they all sounded amazing to me. I think the addition of Jack Bruce is great, and I think. And there's some really incredible playing, and it's better recorded, obviously, than than the first album.
I don't know if folks can see that, but it says play it loud, play it very loud, and that is absolutely applicable here.
And I think it sounds a lot better. The difference between this and the in Emergency is they aren't quite playing. They aren't quite playing so much by the seat of their pants, so much out there. But that's only because the Emergency is three musicians playing so out there that nobody else has ever played as out there as they are playing. You know, so it's no criticism. Have you heard the Bill Laswell mix?
No.
This, yeah, it wasn't released, but Bill Laswell got hold of the original multi-tracks and remixed it, and you put it on, and it just sounds like it was recorded yesterday.
Wow.
And so, and then the label wouldn't put it out, but if you go online, you'll find it. And I listened to that, you know, when it came out. It sounds absolutely incredible. I think it's really weird to hear Tony Williams' Lifetime beautifully recorded with everything, you know, up front, you know. But yeah, Turn It Over is absolutely brilliant album. It's so, these top three, I could interchange them. You know, it's just they're only ranked now in terms of influence on music. That's the only thing that's ranking them for me. But yeah, for me personally, I can listen to this just as easily as Emergency, just as good.
Yeah, and I think if it wasn't for the other two albums, I think Turn It Over is, you know, would be heralded as the classic that it is. It's my number 3 as well. Yeah. And I love the addition of Jack Bruce here. You know, I was listening to this again the other day, and I'm like, man, it's like this album, and there are some vocals on this album, which again are the weak part of the album. But to me, this sounds like if Cream were to just ditch the vocals and be like an instrumental kind of like fusion act, but still play in that kind of bluesy hard rock style that they did. I mean, that's what this sounds like to me. I mean, McLaughlin has a crushing tone on this album. And whereas I think on Emergency, he's playing, even though his playing on that album is pretty reckless and he's just going for it, he's got a cleaner tone on that album, whereas this album is full of, you know, distortion and fuzz, and it really works. I mean, his guitar sounds enormous here. Jack Bruce's bass just fits right in. I mean, and then you got, you know, Larry Young and Tony thrown into the mix. Absolutely amazing. Vuelta Abajo to me is like an instrumental Cream track. Allah Be Praised just cooks with some great drumming. To Whom It May Concern, parts 1 and 2, absolutely savage. Just Big Nick just rumbles, man, and the organ playing is just terrific. This is a really, really, really good album, folks. Just ahead of its time, I think. Just
and I think Jack Bruce is on every single track, is he? So he's only on certain tracks, isn't he, on there?
Yeah.
And so I think you still can hear the trio sound on there. I think we must mention Larry Young, who is on so many 70s fusion albums, and he's another one of those musicians that will just transform a track when he's on. And what he's doing in this band, you know, with two incendiary soloists, McLaughlin and Tony Williams, and then he's behind it holding it all together.
Yeah.
And when he solos, he's just as incendiary, but when you hear the sort of the way he's transformed the organ trio, it's not like a Jimmy Smith organ trio, because that, you know, sometimes those bass lines aren't there, and he's playing the keyboards in a much more sort of spatial way.
Yeah.
I think John McLaughlin, who obviously is a jazz virtuoso, he can play like Tal Farlow, like Joe Pass, and he's having to work out how to play jazz rock guitar. That's really what's going on at this point. You got to remember, this is like 1969, 1970. The rules hadn't been established, so they're establishing the rules on this album. And so I think when you listen to Turn It Over, they've advanced it a little bit more from Emergency. And John McLaughlin's trying to find that tone where he can play like Hendrix, but also be able to play those lines that come from jazz, and how you improvise and how you relate to the drummer. So it's a pretty special album. I've never quite got why it hasn't got the same credit as Emergency, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. And you know, you talk about McLaughlin again, not to derail the conversation, but if you listen to John's playing, and we're talking just a couple of years here on Bitches Brew, and Jack Johnson, which are obviously Miles Davis albums that he appears on, these two Lifetime albums, and then you listen to the first Mahavishnu album, there's some different stuff going on here. Like he really kind of added some elements to his repertoire in a very, very short time period. And like I can tell the difference between this album and Emergency. There's different tones. He throws some different things out there. I definitely think there are some differences between the Miles stuff and these albums. And then all of a sudden on Mahavishnu, he has added a new element, and he's added more clarity and more speed to his game, and then all the Middle Eastern things and whatnot. So, obviously I know how big a fan you are. So I'm not telling you.
Yeah. So and the thing is that there's a couple of albums around this time that's worth listening to. One would be Escalator Over the Hill by Carla Bley, which is like the huge, epic album which has got all sorts of different groups on. But there's a group there which is basically Jack Bruce, John McLaughlin, and Paul Motion on drums, who's another very free drummer. And that's very interesting to compare to Tony Williams' Lifetime. There's Supernova by Wayne Shorter, where John McLaughlin's paired with Sonny Sharrock, and he's playing free. I think this is a big thing with John McLaughlin. He's incubated what he's done for like 10 years. He's been on the scene in London playing with all these different people. He's played with Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker. He's been right at the beginning of the development of rock music, with Graham Bond and Brian Auber and Georgie Fame. My wife's dad was a singer in the early 60s. He was one of the Larry Parnes boys, along with Marty Wilde and Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent. And he was there in that scene as well. And my wife's mom they were in London at that time. And I've got a couple of friends that were in London at that time. And this is the real birth of rock music, of prog, of jazz, of Hendrix, Cream, Yardbirds. Well, John McLaughlin's there. And I think this is something that doesn't get credited, that he's there at the birth of rock music. He understands rock music, but he's a jazz virtuoso. I can remember that someone told me that John McLaughlin had given lessons to Jimmy Page in the early days. John McLaughlin was his session guitarist, and they said, John, can you play like a Chuck Berry solo? And he goes, I don't play Chuck Berry solos. So someone said, there's this kid I know, he can play Chuck Berry solos, bring him in, and then we can train him up. And they brought Jimmy Page in. So he was working with, Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones. I once read an interview with, I can't remember which player it was, but he said he was working with John McLaughlin, and Jimmy Page turned up the rehearsal room and sort of came in. John, it's so great to see you. So people forget he's there. He's there right at the beginning, and it's such a wide range of influences in that guy. And then he goes to America, and he hooks up with Miles, Tony Williams, Wayne Shorter. He's on Miroslav Vitas' albums. And you can see him having to negotiate through all these things that he can do. And I think, there's the famous jam with Hendrix that he did, that's on YouTube. You can hear it. And I think he's trying to take what Hendrix is doing, what Clapton's doing. It's a really interesting story, early John McLaughlin. I'm fascinated by it. My wife's mom, my mother-in-law, was best friends with a singer called Duffy Power. And Duffy had a band which was John McLaughlin, Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker. And then Duffy Power was this incredible singer. And they did some recordings around about 64, 65. And you listen to it and it just sounds like prog. So he's just ahead of the game. He's just absolutely ahead of the game. And so you do feel like there's this explosion happening at that point, running up to the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And of course, the Mahavishnu Orchestra they are the game changer, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
That first album, but with Tony Williams' Lifetime, I think the sort of brutal improvisational style of rock meeting jazz. Because the funny thing with Lifetimes, it's not like there's lots of rock beats, is there?
Right.
It's a lot of they're still swinging a lot of the time, and there's a lot of sort of 60s sort of beat group type playing going on. That I don't think they quite got the rhythms of fusion right. I think that happened when John met Billy Cobham, and I think the Mahavishnu Orchestra started out as just Cobham and John McLaughlin. I don't think Don't know if you know this, but yeah, for the first few months, it was just Cobham and John McLaughlin jamming together. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear John in this setting. I think if they've been supported by the label and hadn't been so badly recorded and messed around, he wouldn't have formed the Mavish Orchestra. And I think we'd all be talking about Tony Williams' Lifetime now, to be honest.
Yeah, could be. Interesting, kind of look back on it. And
yeah.
Let's not forget again, I was a little too young at the time, but from everything I've read, most like jazz purists hated these albums. Absolutely hated these albums.
Oh God, yeah. And another interesting thing I'll bring in, as I did play for Robert Plant for a number of years, I was on a tour bus with him once, and I mentioned the Mavish Orchestra to him, and of course he didn't like the Mavish Orchestra, and I remember he said, "It sounds like somebody pouring ball bearings onto a metal roof," and I was like, "Well, that's the best sound there is, you know." And I said this thing about John McLaughlin teaching Jimmy Page, and he went, "Oh, I'm sure that never happened." But it's funny because for me, Led Zeppelin were one of those bands that took me towards the Mavish Orchestra, you know, so it was quite surprising, you know, that I'm sure there was an influence there. I'm sure Jimmy working with him, I really do think there was an influence from Mavish to Zeppelin as well. I think definitely an influence on Zappa, definitely an influence on Yes, where you really hear the bands change, you know. So yeah, it's a huge change in music. But yeah, I can remember that conversation.
Too funny. All right, we're at the top two. Well,
yeah,
we know what's going to be up there, right?
My number two is Believe It, and it was the number one. It was the number one, and then I put Emergency on the other day. So Believe It is again one of the most underrated fusion albums of all time. It's just fantastic, and I all the playing on it's incredible. Holdsworth is absolute best, playing with Tony Williams, and they gel so well. The compositions are brilliant, and the thing I really want to say about this album is that it sounds like a band in a room. It doesn't sound like they've overdubbed or added anything to it. You feel like the band was just cooking. They were brilliant. They got amazing compositions. They walked in, mic'd it all up and recorded it. And what you hear is an amazing band just playing, which for some fusion albums, you don't really feel that. So yeah, I just think it's absolutely incredible. Could have been my number one. Almost gets sidelined a little bit because of the first Tony Williams Lifetime. This one doesn't get the credit either that it should. But yeah, that's I think it's a really incredible album.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, this is tough, but I ultimately went with Emergency at number 2 from 1969. 71 minutes of pure, unadulterated ferocity, right? I mean, is that kind of, you know, I mean, this is just, the guys are just letting it all hang out, reckless abandon. Larry Young, McLaughlin, Tony Williams, that's it. Organ, guitar, and drums. Don't need anything else. I think for me, one of the reasons I put this down at number 2 is, again, you got those vocals from Tony from time to time, which I'm like, oh, it's just not needed. He's not a good singer, but man, Jesus, the title track is ridiculous. Where is so good. God, Beyond Games, just kind of, I love the organ on that track. Vashtar is just amazing.
Which is a famous blues. You know that one? I think John McLaughlin sings on that one.
Yeah, he's not a good singer either. Yeah.
No, just when you thought Tony was bad, John starts singing.
Yeah.
I've got to be honest, even with the singing on the first album, it is so out there. I quite like the singing on the first album. It's because I think this album has to be really treated in its own world, because it is absolutely awfully recorded.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that you have to take that bad recording, because I think without that, it wouldn't be the album that it is. This is such a strange thing to say, I think. But I think because they didn't know how to record it, and because the record engineer was distorting everything, you couldn't clean the album up.
Yeah, it would
ruin it.
So
yeah.
raw. Yeah.
And then they're playing it. I mean, sometimes, and this is what you don't get on Turn It Over. Sometimes on this album, it feels like Tony Williams gone, let's just go somewhere else, and he just changes tempo like this, and they just all go with him, and you hear like stuff buzzing in the mix. You hear like bad connections, and then they all come down, and then they all start singing, and sometimes, there's one bit I think where John's singing and Tony's singing at the same time. They're singing completely different.
Yeah, they're just kind of scatting along around.
Yeah,
like, what is this?
I think John's like pretending to be like a Vietnam, soldier in Vietnam, and then, Tony's going, "Oh, take me home tonight." And so for me, the vocals on this, I wouldn't like to take them off because it is just so trippy and weird and out there, and just when you go, what's this weird thing? Suddenly, bang, and they're off, and it's into this sort of, incredible, improvisational realm. Tony's playing on it is off the chart.
Oh yeah, he is just rumbling and roaring throughout this. I mean, that's why I love the cover shot, even though it's kind of fuzzy and everybody. It just gives you he's just going for it, and that's what this whole album is all about. It's absolutely fierce and unstructured. It's almost like this is like one of the greatest like space rock albums ever created. But it's not
exactly
album, right?
Yeah, exactly that. I know it's Vinnie Colaiuta's favorite album.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge Vinnie fan. And when I was trying to get my head on what Vinnie was doing, and he mentioned that, so I then went back to it and listened to what Tony was doing, and realized it wasn't just all space rock. That Tony's just the polyrhythms and the stuff that's going on in there is just really, really heavy, especially on the title track "Emergency."
Yeah.
I think that for me is my favorite Tony Williams moment of all this, is the title track there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, Sangria for Three is another great one.
Incredible, yeah.
Yeah, just great stuff. Out of Control, and I want to show the back there. Yeah, it's it needs to be heard to be believed, right? I mean, that's basically there's nothing like this, and there's the man. So yeah, I don't, I know it's your number one. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about it, but
the bit at the end of Emergency when they're just going for it, and I think Tony Williams is shouting his head off, that bit, and he's going, whoa, whoa. That to me is just, they just don't make albums like that. And even Weather Report and the Maverick Juncture hasn't got anything like that. It's reckless abandon.
Yeah.
On record, and people. I think Herbie Hancock said he went to see Tony Williams' Lifetime, and he was in there, and he said it was a toss-up between him leaving to save his hearing, or him experiencing music changing, and he said he stayed, and he probably suffered a bit of hearing loss for it, because they were playing at incredible volumes, and I think Tony Williams used to set a PA with his drums in right up behind his head, so this is really interesting for jazz, because jazz is always very quiet, and I think the Maverick Juncture were the same, playing it at a very high volume, but on this album the bad recording quality sort of emulates that. It sounds out of control, so there's so many elements to this album that make it such a special album. And yeah, it was. Believe it was my number one, and then I put it on the car, about 2 days ago. I thought, now this has to be put up there. It's like, it's really up there with albums for me like In a Mountain Flame, Jack Johnson, those three albums. That's where jazz fusion begins.
Yeah, I love the Jack Johnson record. My God, it's like it's for many years. Bitches Brew was my favorite Miles, and then I got the Jack Johnson album like in the mid '80s, and I was like, oh yeah, there's something special about that album, boy, really good. Yeah, my number one is Believe It from '75. Absolute powerhouse. I don't think I need to mention the lineup again, but this, you hit the nail on the head. This sounds like a true solidified band. I mean, I really think that if they could have kept this band going, this is the fusion band that could have ranked up there with some of the other ones we've already mentioned. But there's a big difference between this album and the one that came after it, right?
Yeah,
But here, all the compositions are amazing. I mean, Snake Oil, absolutely
brilliant. Yeah,
Fred is just beautiful, dreamy, melodic, right? Protocosmos is just scorching, absolutely scorching. Red Alert, heavy fusion. Wildlife has got this big, majestic, melodic kind of thing going on there, which is just sticks in your head, doesn't get out. Mr. Spock has got grooves to die for with some great Tony and Alan soloing. Yeah, it's just one of the all-time best fusion albums, and perhaps my favorite Alan Holdsworth playing on any album that he ever appeared on. This and Bundles by Soft Machine, I think, are two of my favorite Alan Holdsworth recordings of all time. Just amazing playing from the whole band. But
great. Is there even an average composition amongst those tunes?
No.
Everyone's like a classic tune, isn't it? That you know, and you can sing it and you know it. And then $1 Million Legs, there isn't really one at all like that, you know. And that's really odd. This is going through it. This is what's really interesting about Tony Williams, is actually how patchy it is. It's patchy, isn't it? It's like his moments of utter brilliance, and then he seems to follow it up with less brilliance. And that I think that's really, really interesting. In terms of Tony Williams as a player, if I was listing all my favorite Tony Williams albums, he's often on other people's albums. You know, as I said, my favorite Tony Williams bit of drumming is on Stanley Clarke's self-titled album. You know, that's some amazing playing. Yes, very, very, very strange discography. In the 80s, those jazz albums he made, they're really fantastic. The quality is much higher in the 80s with them, but he moves away from fusion, you know, which is odd. But
yeah,
very, very strange. And then him dying so young as well. It's you know, what would he be doing now? You know, because I'm sure he would still be around, still doing stuff. And like I said, the stuff he was doing with Bill Laswell just before he died was very interesting. His drumming on the Public Image Limited album is absolutely incredible. I mean, that's something we've got to mention. You know, if you want to check out Tony Williams, get the Public Image Limited album, where it's him, Ginger Baker, Jonas Hellborg, Steve Vai, and then John Lydon singing. Just one of the most incredible, strange combinations ever, you know. So yeah, but I do love him, and I think he really was the beginning of all modern drumming. I think every drummer now, in some ways, is playing something that Tony Williams did. You know,
it's funny, in a weird way. You look at the career of Tony Williams and Alan Holdsworth, and they've kind of followed a similar, you know, you had these two guys, which if you talk to fellow musicians and people who know a lot about music, will cite both of these guys as two of the greatest on their instrument of all time. But yet the commerciality, the success that a lot of their peers got kind of avoided them to an extent, right? And by the time, you know, we lost them, it's not like everybody was talking about Tony Williams or Alan Holdsworth. It's not like they had, you know, all the Grammy Awards and made all the money that some of their contemporaries did, which is kind of a shame. But
I think you've said, following on from what I said, I think you said something really interesting there. Perhaps the patchiness is actually coming from the fact that this is a guy trying to survive, as opposed to reaping the rewards. You felt the same thing with Alan Holdsworth. He was right on the edge the whole time. I can remember a couple of years before he died, he came and played up here just outside my town, and I didn't go to see him. And this is really bizarre, because now I think if Alan Holdsworth did a gig, you'd have 1,000 people in there to watch it. But back then, I didn't go to see him. But I know the guys around the venue, and I said, "How did the Alan Holdsworth gig go?" And they said, "Oh, we only had about 20 people in." You know, so this is the thing that with these guys, I think they weren't in the top end at all. And, you know, just trying to keep bands together, trying to hold players like that together was difficult for them, which is probably why, you know, especially with this second Tony Williams lifetime lineup, that he just couldn't hold the musicians together, you know. And it's a shame, because I'm like you, I do love the 80s and 90s Holdsworth, but in the 70s, there's a difference in his sound, which I think he hadn't quite developed his setup to play the legato, and so the legatos, you feel it's coming much more from his fingers, and so especially the solo on bundles and on some of these, and some of the solos on, because my favorite Holdsworth playing outside his solo albums is Gaseous by Gong.
Yeah, that's a great one too. Yeah.
That's one of my very favorite albums of all time. And yeah, I know what you mean. These albums you hear a side of Holdsworth that you don't hear on his own albums. I think his own compositions actually are so dense that there isn't often the space for him to just let go and go nuts, you know. Whereas bundles, they just hit that riff and then Holdsworth goes for it, you know, and it's just like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. I think he tended to be more of a riffy guy on some of the 70s appearances. And then whereas I think his playing took on a little bit more of an ethereal nature on his solo albums in the 80s into the 90s. He was big on all these really expressive chords, and then he would go do his solo, which, you know, the solos are always great. But I think there was like a kind of go for the throat aspect of playing when he was appearing on other people's albums that I don't think he captured it, but it was like, it wasn't as often on his solo albums. And again, for those watching, it's like we're not we love the Alan Holdsworth solo albums, but there was an element of his playing pre the 80s when he appeared on other people's albums that I think and maybe he just didn't want to, maybe that just wasn't his thing, but he never quite captured that on his solo albums, as great as they are. And that's why usually when I look back on like my favorite Holdsworth appearances, I usually kind of go to, you know, the Soft Machine albums, the Lifetime albums, the Gong albums, right? And the Jean-Luc Ponty, right? I mean,
oh God, yeah.
Geez, I mean that, and Atlantic Ocean that's another one. That's could be my number 2 favorite appearance by, you know, if it's not Believe It, and if it's not Bundles, it's probably Enigmatic Ocean. I mean, that's just absolutely incredible.
I think it's fair to say that he's such an amazing musician that it's just so interesting in hearing him in different contexts. It's interesting. I'm such a big fan of your show, and every time anyone's ranking anything and then Holdsworth gets mentioned, it takes over the whole conversation. Here we're talking about
it's happening right now.
It happened in the Stanley Clarke one, and here we are back talking about it again. And I think that's just because he was the greatest guitarist that ever lived, you know, and he was so way beyond everybody else. And I think Tony Williams is similar on drums, you know, really, you know, one of the great drummers. And so, yeah, you want to hear them together. You know, they did play together. Was it on Atavachron? They play on Looking Glass, isn't it? On the track Looking Glass, they played together. You know, and God, why didn't Tony not play more on some of Holdsworth's solo albums? Because that would have been amazing. Because they're such a brilliant pairing, because their approach to time is so fluid, both of them. You know, Believe It. Yeah, I would say that and Emergency. You know, those are the 2 albums. If you want to get into Tony Williams, go and buy those now. Go and get them right now.
Without a doubt. And I like your idea. You were talking about listening to those couple albums in the car. I'm not going to put these CDs away. They're going to go into the car with me for the next couple of days, along with this bad boy right here. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be listening.
So when you asked me to do this, that's the thing. I listened to them all again, and it's you know, some of these albums you know so well that you don't listen to them anymore. You know, I think especially Stanley Clarke, Journey to Love. You know, you put them on again, and it's just like, oh, back home, and this is just amazing, and it's not tiresome because I just still love it, you know. And I think it was like that with Emergency. I think when I was younger, Emergency was actually a bit of a hard album for me. When I was very young, I went and got it, and it was like, oh, what the hell's this? But putting it on now, again, I was just like, oh my God. And I just picked up on the rawness. Rather, when I was a kid, I was always listening for the virtuosity. And of course, it is virtuoso. Yeah. But listen to it now, it's just like, oh my God, they're just going for it. I can't think of another album where anyone went into the studio and just went that berserk. You know, it's just nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So there you have it, everybody. ranking the albums of the Tony Williams Lifetime in the comments below. Please rank them as you like them. And I want to thank Andy for jumping on and helping out with this tough assignment once again. So stay tuned for sometime in June. We've decided earlier today when we were chatting, we're going to kind of do the same thing, kind of like what we did on the Stanley Clarke episode. We're going to rank our 10 favorite albums of drum legend Billy Cobham. Of course, he's got a ton of solo albums, so we're going to pick our 10 favorites. That's coming up sometime in June, so stay tuned for that. Andy, you want to fill everybody in on kind of what's new with you these days?
Yes, I've just done a record with Don Powell from Slade, which is a version of Sandy Nelson's Let There Be Drums, which is coming out very soon. Please watch out for that. It's going to be a video, and there's actually 18 drummers on this track. Someone said it might be a world record to have so many drummers in the studio on one track. And we've also got Bev Bevan on there, Brian Bennett's on there, and a whole host. Craig Blundell's on there from Steve Hackett, Steve Wilson, he's on there. So that's been fun. I'm currently working on 2 albums. One is the next Quill album with Bev Bevan, which we hope to have out soon. Got a whole ton of guests on, and we're trying to land some really huge guests. I can't say who, but somebody from one of your favorite bands.
Really?
Yeah. But we'll have to see, but there's a whole host of guests on there. And I'm also working on the Rain album. Here's the last Rain album for those of you. I'm going to do a proper plug now.
That's right.
It's my band with John Jarrett from IQ and Frost, and then me on vocals and Rob Brocut on keyboards and vocals. And we're working on the next album for that, which is great fun. That's going to fall down. We've just actually gone in the studio and recorded a very special track. I don't know if I can announce it. It's got something to do with Rozfest, so I'll send you a message. There's something going on, but I don't want to be the first one to say that. But I've hinted at something interesting there. Of course, Rozfest is coming back. It's next year, isn't it? Rozfest is coming back, so I can't say much more about it.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll hear about it soon enough.
There's a ton of stuff happening. Hopefully I've whetted everyone's appetite. Some stuff that we can announce later. And thanks for having me, Pete. Like I said, I'm a massive fan of your YouTube and website. And it's fantastic to be able to just not watch you, but also answer you back. It's quite strange, really. I know when I watch you later tonight, I'll be throwing in my answers, then going, oh no, I'm not on it anymore. So.
Well, it's a pleasure as always having you on, Andy, and I look forward to our next collaboration. So thanks again. And visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube. I'll let you say it today.
What was that?
You gotta say all the damn time. That's what I was.
Of course, yes.
All the damn time.
I can't say that, Pete. That's what you say.
I know, but I tell you, a lot of times my guests, they just go and throw it out there. I don't even have to say anything. So for Andy Edwards, I'm Pete Pardo.
English is too polite.
That's right. Okay, you're not like us crazy Americans over here, right? Yes. Thanks everybody for watching. For Andy Edwards, I'm Pete Pardo. Have a good one. Bye-bye.